right, hello and welcome everyone. Today we are going to be discussing the Vesper 77 and its new augment leaded gas, which is available through the current Nightwave. For that, we have a lot to talk about today, and it's not going to only be talking about how the Vesper 77 is now better given its leaded gas augment. For those of you that just want to, hey, what build on weapon, what go build, this is the build for the weapon, and we're going to shoot it at some enemies to show how good it is. This is pretty basic. Obviously, we're on leaded gas. This is adding a bunch of damage. It's on heat because we're getting a bunch of status chance when heat procs are good. Is going to be the TLDR for this. Galvanized crosshairs because you're going to be ADS almost all the time, and the extra crit damage, or the extra crit chance rather, is very, very good. Semi-pistol cannonade because you value the punch through over any attack speed that you could be adding, and then deadhead because headshot multiplier is like exactly what this weapon wants. And if you just want to pop heads, this is going to be the build you're going to want to use. Pistol Elementalist is here for the status damage increase on both gas and on heat, which is excellent. And the reload increase is also actually quite appreciated on this because you're going to be reloading very often, which is very low with this very low magazine size. Now, to show this just against our usual guys, we have our group here of 225 Steel Path Corrupted guys, and it does pretty well. Obviously, these enemies are like not like their AI's off and yada yada, but you can see the damage that this is going to be doing. And also, the big notable thing about this in the way that this is built is that because it's not an acuity build, which I feel like a lot of people are probably going to be putting together, if I shoot a guy in the body, he still dies. So that is kind of like the thing here is you're not going to get just all headshots. And if you are, you certainly wouldn't be using this weapon over some other choices you have like the Chigurh. But like it's solid. You get some headshots. You have the proc active. You can kind of just like shoot just into crowds. Like the punch through will hit multiple enemies, proc a bunch of times, kill lines of guys. And it's pretty good. It's much better than without leaded gas. Leaded gas adds the AoE that this weapon desperately needs to do like higher level clear. But I do feel that this weapon is still a little bit on the disappointing side whenever you look at its requirements. It requires 1999. It's MR 14, which is just so high. It's the same MR requirement as the Latum. And whenever you compare the Vesper to the Latum, it is very, very unfavorable for the Vesper 77. But it's an enjoyable weapon, which I like a whole lot, and it gives us the opportunity to talk about gas damage and how weird it is and how likely very, very bugged it is. So, warning, before we get into this, I'm going to speak math words into the microphone, and I'm just going to hope everyone can keep up with this. If you can't, that's okay. The part of this video that shows the build and you can just shoot guys in the head is already done. For that, gas damage is strange, and over that, elemental damage is strange. So we're going to talk about the basics of how this stuff works, which is to talk about how regular procs work, like heat, for example. So the way that a heat proc works, if we look at it at its most basic level, is if you take 100 damage, your weapon does 100 damage, and there's heat in there. There's no mods on it. If you inflict a heat proc, the tick damage of that heat proc will be 50. It takes your base damage, and it just multiplies it by 0.5, and then that's your proc. There are things that increase your base damage, and that is, of course, things like semi-pistol cannonade, and you have like your regular damage increasers. Deadhead is also in here on that. And there's like, crits applied to that, and yada, yada, yada. Many things affect the tick multiplier that are known, right? They just increase your damage, and then they increase that. Faction damage mods apply twice, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. But the basic level is that it does just 100 damage times 0.5, and it's 50. What the heat mods do, and what all of the other like regular base damage mods do that we're all very familiar with, those of us that know are familiar with, like electric procs and toxic procs and all that stuff. The way that these mods work is if you add primed heated charge, this 165% heat not only increases your heat damage, it doesn't affect your proc damage on the same level as you'd expect. It doesn't just take the 165% and increase your base damage. This adds a different multiplier called an elemental tick multiplier. And what that is it basically takes that 50 damage you would normally deal, and then it multiplies that by 1 plus your multiplier, which is 1.65 in this case. So it's a 2.65 multiplier to that 50 damage. Importantly, whenever you have really high bonuses like this heat one, that's quite a bit. And taking 50 to over 100 means if you shot a guy for 100 damage, your ticks actually do more damage than your upfront damage is. So each tick of the heat proc will do more than you can deal with a bullet you're shooting the enemy with, which is really, really good. And part of the reason why heat is so good is because primed heated charge is incredible on all of these secondary weapons. With that, that's how like a single elemental that we can normally mod for will usually function. And I hope that is understandable for everybody that's watching this video. Leaded gas is in a unique position. This is 300% gas damage. Directly, it is gas damage. And as a small history lesson, in the past, we have been able to access this by itself through Lavos. Before 1999 and before the damage rework, the thing you could do with Lavos is you could use his Valence Augment, and then you would just make a gas and put it directly onto your weapons. And it was found out that this also works the same way as heat does whenever it is a combined element that is directly on one mod. One of the things that's really weird about modding is that if you take the way to make gas damage on your weapon, which would be like Pistol Pestilence, plus heated charge, you obviously have that 165 plus 60, and that's 2.25, or 225% that you're adding onto the weapon of elemental damage. But whenever you make gas that way and inflict a gas proc, that proc doesn't get an elemental tick multiplier because it's heat and toxin, not gas, being added directly to the weapon, which has always been weird to me, and I've always thought that the things that make up gas should also, like, multiply how much it's actually dealing in terms of damage, because that just makes sense to me, and it makes it so that the combined ones can keep up with the uncombined ones. But that's kind of a separate discussion here. The main thing about adding gas damage directly is that it does function, or it's at least supposed to function, as a 300% multiplier in this case, which would mean it is a multiplier to your tick damage of 4, which is huge. Multiplying your damage by 4 on your ticks for gas is incredible and exactly what you would want. Now we're going to talk about the ways that this is bugged and doesn't work. So, unfortunately for leaded gas, this should be better than it is. The reason it's not better than it is twofold. One, whenever you proc leaded gas, and to show this off, we're going to have a special group of enemies here. This is usually like the type of thing that I test on. So we're just going to show this a little behind the curtain for you guys. We need a gunner in this case because of the headshot necessities, making it easy. We spawn in these enemies. You can see like this is just how they're laid out. These two are close enough together that you can see the procs. And this is going to be a little hard to show. So whenever I headshot, and I need to change the thing. Because if this is full build, it'll be really hard to see. So here's just leaded gas by itself. So if I take just leaded gas, and I come up here, and I shoot this enemy in the head, right? And I proc leaded gas. And I shoot this enemy, and I get a gas proc. And I get a gas proc. There you go. It does 362 damage. And then it goes down to 91, as you saw there. So the reason it went from 362 to 91 is that normally the Vesper has a base damage of 180, and there's rounding involved in Warframe's math and the way you deal damage. So it goes down to 91 whenever you do that times 0.5 on that 180. So it's 180 times 0.5. That means that it's just our base damage in half is 91. But you saw it was 362 for a second there, which is notably 4 times the 90 that we would normally be getting. The reason for that is because it is working. Whenever we proc leaded gas and then we proc gas on this enemy, we are getting that 362. But that stops happening whenever our buff goes away. And not only does it stop happening when our buff goes away, it stops happening if the target we shot is dead. And because this weapon's function is to shoot an enemy in the head for a really big gas proc and kill them to death, that means that all of the gas procs that you would be getting that would be lingering from a dead enemy, which is the whole point of what this weapon wants to do 25% of the damage they're supposed to be doing. Because not only do the gas procs not snapshot the gas damage they were inflicted with, which would mean that whether or not my buff runs out, then like it doesn't matter, and like this will continue to do 362 even if that buff is gone. You can keep headshotting enemies in order to keep that buff going, but if you're not doing that, if the enemy dies, they don't see the 300% anymore. And the way that we can show that is actually with a lower level version of these enemies to make it way easier to show. But if I kill all these guys, we're going to set these guys down to like level 100. Turn off steel path modifiers and spawn these guys back in. Nice pattern here. The way that we can show this, and it might take a couple tries, is basically I'm going to shoot this enemy in the head, and then I'm going to proc a gas proc here. I'm going to swap to the Kuvahek. I'm going to eliminate this enemy, and then you're going to see the damage here. I will have to come back to this enemy to shoot them in the head again with leaded gas, so that you can see that that is continuing on to keep this consistent. But this is the literal test that I did to figure out how the hell this shit works. So, headshot, leaded gas, shoot this leaded gas. And you can see that that is 91, even though I have the leaded gas buff up. You see like the lingering last bits of that, the 91 on the edge there. I'll show it again. I've done this test like a lot of times at this point, but basically the TLDR about it is that this means that this weapon is like way, way less good than it should be. And it also means that gas procs have a lot of problems. Like just the gas procs inherently, like that elemental bonus should probably be a thing that they get from their individual elements that are creating gas. And it also is probably a thing where like that should snapshot and just continue to deal that damage. Whenever you get a gas proc, and then also like when an enemy dies, they shouldn't lose all of your elemental bonus modifiers. All of that stuff is weird and doesn't really make much sense, especially with how gas procs would want to be used. It's worth noting that a lot of what I'm talking about also applies to every other like mixed elemental. Like blast damage doesn't get a bonus from heat and cold mods, even though it probably really should, and it would really make that much better. But notably, the new magnetic mods, magnetic whenever it breaks an overguard or a shield, it gets converted into an electric proc. That's how magnetic actually applies its elemental bonus. It works on those electric procs that are created from magnetic being applied to an overguard or a shield, and it makes the magnetic mods way better than it even would normally be what you'd expect to get out of them. So anyway, there's a bunch of things with this, but like just how this functions. Nope, we did not get a gas proc. We got a gas proc on you. Okay, well, we'll wait a second for that to wear off for an accurate test. We got a crit, which is the 1300. Crits affect gas damage. Shock and surprise. Okay. We're very good at critting. We're excellent at it. We have no crit mods on this, but here we are. Better lucky than good. Another crit. Okay. We're doing our best. Come on. There we go. I didn't reload this, so I'm very smart. Okay. Here we go again. Here we go. Bang. You see your buff did not end, but that's still 91. Yeah, you could see it like it. Yeah. Yeah, it's very much it's very frustrating that this is not as good as it should be, and also like the way that the combined elemental procs in general work is just very unfortunate. But yeah, that's the Vesper 77, and also maybe some like elemental lessons about how things work with weapon modding. Hopefully it's been helpful to you. It's still pretty good. I mean, especially for like a single target little pew pew. Not bad. Like I like it. And like if you have like a primer for viral, if you're using like Diriga or like Vulpaphyla or something like that, then it'll do colossally more damage. And like you can pop heads, and like, you know, if you want to use this weapon, it's more than like reasonably capable. It's just that at the time you would be using this, you have access to so much better gear that it's kind of tough to argue that you should be using it in any given case. I really wish this weapon was more like an MR10 thing. MR10 would be probably a real nice feel good for this, or if it was just a quest reward from 1999, that probably also would be a pretty good feel good. But realistically, at its MR14 standard that it's at right now, competing with the Latum and stuff like that, this weapon's 180 base damage. It very realistically could have been 500 base damage, and all that would have done is made it feel better at lower levels, and not actually made it much better in all like realistic terms, which is, it's kind of a function of the weapon and like the state of like what the meta in Warframe is right now, where we got to kill every guy on screen, and this weapon's not going to do like the single target instant kill this one guy thing that you would really want on like a demo list. There's other weapons that are better at that stuff, or of course things like Mesa to handle those situations, if you saw my most recent build video for her. Anyway, though, that's a little discussion video on the Vesper 77. I thought this was really interesting to test. Hopefully it was really interesting to show you guys the way that I test this stuff a little bit, and to like, you know, hopefully you're enjoying the Vesper 77 build. But yeah, good stuff. Hey everybody, it's time to thank the patrons that are hanging around and supporting the channel. So, to start with that, the $10 patrons are Athean, Alex Farnham, Arbiter Daydream, Barkus, Benuven, Blotomatic, Brutus Salazar, Candelathra, Blob World, Dylan Dworsky, Athrain, James Hearththorne, JC4 Science, Josh, Luzanth, Vikatil, Michta, Nerve, Ruby, Sanyu, Sharp247, The Coupon of Death, Waifu Wars, Wodad01, and Zeraphir. Also, thanks, of course, to all of the other patrons for supporting the channel. It is much appreciated. It's a little sneak peek on what we're getting into. There's going to be a lot more of these kind of big re-reviews of weapon types and their new builds and stuff, as things changed a lot at the end of last year. And of course, there's also planned new free-to-play before we get into any more big updates. So look forward to that.